Behavior is simply a byproduct of your values. So if you're having a behavior issue in your organization that is not acceptable to you, I encourage you to go back and begin to look at your values. Have you stated those values? Is that a shared value? Is that only your value and it's not your team members' value? Welcome to the Culture-neer podcast. I'm your host, Gwaltney, where my goal is to help you grow a culture that your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. Listen, today I want to talk to you about being really clear on our shared values, why that's important in our organization. When you think about values, or let me just talk just for a minute. For most people that are listening to this podcast, you probably set out to grow a company. And there comes a point in the evolution of every organization that many times you start by yourself as an entrepreneur. Then you realize, wow, I have a product I think people actually want, and I have a service that, is really in demand. And what happens at that point, you have to begin to hire additional people. And that becomes one of the biggest struggles, I think, for most of us that are in business, especially depending on your personality, because many times you think, well, nobody's going to care as much as I care. Nobody's going to do it the way I do it. John Maxwell says, when he talks about delegation in leadership, if you have somebody on your team that can do what you do 80% as well, you need to delegate it to them. Because the reality is what will happen is you will limit the amount of people that you can serve and the size that your organization can grow. So knowing that in the beginning, it's very foundational for you to, after you determined your why you got into business, what are the values that you want to see shared amongst the team members that you're going to add to that team? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to do this really in two parts because I think the subject matter is so important. And honestly, the topic can be pretty deep that we'll go through a portion of this today. We'll do a little bit of a recap. And then I want to challenge you, if you've not created some core values, how you can kind of go about that process. And you may be in a situation where you have core values that are hanging on a wall somewhere, but in reality, nobody's paying attention to them out in the field or when they're interacting with your customers. And so maybe those need to be fine-tuned a little bit. So hopefully when we get to the end of this today, you're going to see where you need to tweak, or again, maybe you're starting out and this is brand new for you, and you're just building foundationally. Either way, I think we'll have some content that will help you today. My goal always is when we get together to spend 20 or 30 minutes as we go through these podcasts in order just to try to add value and help you grow in your leadership and grow in your culture. I really do believe that strategy is important in any kind of business. It's also important in a nonprofit. But at the same time, culture is even more important. Because that really determines how engaged the rest of your team is going to be to really carry out that mission. So strap in, hold on today. I think we're going to be able to add some value. So I want to talk real quick. What we value drives what we do. Now think about that just for a minute. What we value drives what we do. So if you value integrity, let's say in your sales process, then you're not going to overpromise just to get a sale. Why? Because that's a value. If you value people's time, then it won't be acceptable in your organization to consistently show up late for work, or show up late for a meeting, or show up late for an appointment if you're serving a customer. Why? Because the value of the organization drives what we do. And so you're building an organization. And you think about that just for a minute. Well, how do I determine what my values are in my organization? Rewind that. What's important to you? What are your values? So if you're a company of one, what is it that you value every day when you get up, when you manufacture your product? Is it making sure that I'm providing a product or a service to a customer that's more than what they expect? Then that's a value. Excellence is a value. If creating a brand that people can depend on consistently is important to you. Maybe integrity, super important to you, so that becomes a value. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but one of the things you have to consider is if everything is important to you, then nothing is really important to you. If you value everything, you really value nothing. And so, we'll get to the point where you have to really begin to process through, and it becomes a very short list of what those values really are. So your culture really is a result of what you value. And if you think through that, if you reward and recognize teamwork amongst your employees, then you're going to have a team that's very quick to jump in, solve problems simply when they see another team member needing help. You're not going to hear them say, well, that's not my job, that's not my department, that's not what I'm paid to do, because the culture that you've created and you've valued rewards the type of behavior where people just want to help other people. And see, that's very intentional. If you don't value the experience of your employees, then you're going to have employees that really don't value the experience of your customers. One of the things about Southwest Airlines, I recently was in a culture event with Ginger Hardage, and she was the VP of culture for Southwest for several years. She recently retired. One of the things I love about that organization, even as I heard her speak, still very passionate about an organization now that she's retired and removed from and going on and doing other things in her life, is that they value their employees first, because they realize that if they built a system that showed that they value their employees, the byproduct of that is that they would value their customers. And they consistently win in the airline industry, awards that proves out that very fact, that their customer service is over the top and their customer satisfaction is through the roof. But it's because of what they value. So how do we create a shared values-driven culture? Because really, when you think about culture, in a lot of ways, it's a bunch of things that are very intangible. It's not the ping pong table. It's not just being able to bring your pets to work, or, casual every day, or show up in your pajamas, or whatever else you could kind of plug into that thought process. But really, it's something that you can't really put your hands around. It's almost, I like to describe it sometimes, it's almost like air. You can't see it. You have to have it to exist. And you really only pay attention if the air is bad or you can't breathe because you need it. But many times you take it for granted. And you can go into your favorite restaurant, your favorite organization, your favorite car dealership, whatever the case might be, and you can immediately begin to sense what type of culture is there. And so if it's something that you really feel like you want to be a part of, you feel accepted. It's like people love what they do here. People are always so happy here. What that is you're experiencing the culture of that particular organization. Contrastly, when you go in and people could care less whether you're there, the service is subpar, the attitude is poor, and the attention to detail is lacking. You experience what the culture is like there. So it's super important because those shared values become a byproduct of the culture. So one thing that I can tell you is when you experience a really, really good culture, it's because somewhere there's a leader or a group of leaders that's seen the importance and how valuable that was, and they're guarding that on an ongoing basis. So if I'm talking to leaders today, I want you to think about the culture that you want, the organization that you want to create lives in the theater of your mind only. That's really what vision is. And so once you begin to see what that looks like and you start to get some momentum, then you're going to be very vigilant, I should say, about guarding that culture. So it comes out in all of the people decisions that you make. It comes out in your benefit package. It comes out in the social media content that you put out. I mean, every single aspect that you're viewing that through the lens of culture and why that's so important. So you have to protect it. Healthy cultures, they just don't happen by accident. They're very intentional. And I like to say culture is either created um, or it's what you allow. It's kind of like teaching. You teach what you allow. It's very similar in culture. The combination of your culture right now is what you've created or what you've allowed. There's really no in between of that. In between in that. So your values shape that culture, but it also becomes the glue that really holds your team together. So company culture describes the shared characteristics of an organization. And so I want to encourage you just to kind of write this down, because again, we talked a little bit the last time we were together that culture, I think, is one of the most misunderstood words. It's very used, maybe overused. We understand that it's important, but still so few people can accurately describe really what it is. And this is a great definition. It's shared characteristics of an organization. So that's going to include your vision. That's going to include your mission. That's going to include the attitude, the language, the behaviors, and your values. So culture really becomes the way every member on your team thinks, the way every member on your team acts. It's how they understand the world that's around them. It defines the values and the behaviors that are acceptable and expected. Now think about that just for a minute. When you have a healthy culture, it tends to define the lines of what's acceptable and what's not. It also, your own team members in many ways will kind of become the policeman, so to speak, of the culture of your organization, because they know what is acceptable and what isn't. And they're quick to protect that. Because guys, today in our society, many people are not leaving an organization because of what they're paid or a benefit package. They're leaving because they're leaving management. They're leaving because they're leaving bad culture. And many of the reasons that they stay is not because maybe they're making the most money. They're united by something far deeper than a paycheck. It's a real sense of purpose. It's a real sense of camaraderie that's shared, and it's shared through a value system, which is the whole purpose of what we're talking about today. I really believe this is foundational when you're talking about building culture. I'm going to read you this definition. The basis or the groundwork of anything, or the moral foundation of both society and religion. That's what the word foundation means. It also means the natural or prepared ground or base on which some structure rests. In other words, when we're talking about building your organization, nonprofit or for-profit, you have to start with a foundation, because it holds up everything else that you're going to build that you hope to sustain over the years to come. And it's much like momentum. If you've ever been out trying to push a vehicle, maybe that is stalled on the side of the road, it takes a lot of energy to get the vehicle moving from a dead stop. But once you get it moving, you have this sense of momentum, and it doesn't require as much effort to continue to keep the momentum going. It's very similar to that way in culture. So you have to pay attention to the foundation as you begin to build this, because the last thing you want to do is for the car to stop, and you'd have to exert all that same energy all over again just to get started and hope to catch up to where you should have been. And so you need to pay attention to this. It's really about laying the foundation of the culture. So with anything you build, you have to pay careful attention to the foundation, to the stability, because it will support everything that's going to be built on it. Now you think about that. So I was talking a while ago about what are your values in your organization? Well, what is it that you value? What is it that you're so passionate about, you and your entire team of leadership? What are those pet peeves or those things that drive you and your leadership team crazy? Somewhere in between those two lie those values that you have that you're wanting to pass on. And I think the key word of what we're talking about today is shared. It has to start with you understanding and knowing what your values are. But if you're going to add a team of people and they don't know what the values are, then they're not going to be going through the same decision-making process when they're out there serving your customer, interacting with your vendors, representing you in public. And so that's why those values have to be shared. They can't be shared, number one, if they don't know what they are. So you have to determine what they are. And then you have to have very intentional ways to be able to pass those values on to a system that becomes a part of the decision-making process in the everyday lives of the people that are working on your team. I can tell you this. If organizational values are truly a part of the cultural foundation of an organization, then they're going to guide the policies and the behaviors of the entire team. The influence of your values will be evident in public decisions as well as those that are made in private. Now think about that just for a minute. This means that if the values that are enforced within your organization are different than the ones that are framed and hanging on the wall, it's going to become evident for all to see over time. So we're not talking about an exercise in corporate responsibility to simply check a box that I have a mission statement, I have a vision statement, I have core values on my wall. No, we're talking much more practical. How do I hire 10 people, have them go out and help me reach 10 times the amount of customers that I could reach by myself, add them to my team, and when they're out there in the heat of the moment, having to make a decision to keep a customer happy, come to the same conclusion in their decisions as me? Well, they have to share the same values. And I need to know what those values are before I even begin to recruit that team. Because it's much easier to recruit people that share those values and begin to build on the processes and the standard of an organization than to try to hire people and just instill your values on the inside of them, plus your standard operating practice, if that makes sense. So, why do company values matter? Core values that aren't practiced in an organization create cynical and disgruntled people. In other words, if your message is that we value our employees and we care for our team, but then you don't follow through with that, it seems like you're very hypocritical and you're very cynical. If it's always about cost over care for your employees, if you're never communicating that they're valued as a person and only treating them like a number, then you shouldn't be surprised when they don't care about your customers. When they just treat them as they're dispensable, we'll find another customer. It's a trickle-down effect. And so you've got to make sure that what you're professing is the same thing that you're living out with your team if you want that to be lived out with your customers. I said it earlier, but if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for anything. This is, again, so important on why you identify what your values are. Without organizational core values to guide you, it's very difficult to make decisions about who we should hire and who should be promoted maybe to a customer. Operating in the absence of clearly defined values it's a disaster waiting to happen. So I encourage you to just kind of process back through. Maybe you've had a degree of success that you're operating with, and maybe you've never taken the time to write these down. I promise you're operating with some set of values. The problem is if they're only in your head, it's very hard for the team of people around you to consistently process through those same set of values. Yes, you need to model them, but you need to make it very clear what's important to you. And then you need to be very intentional about how are you driving that message to where they understand that. You think about just time from a time management standpoint. If your team member didn't have to call you every single time to figure out how you would respond in this situation, specifically maybe with a difficult customer, how much extra time you would have. And they many times are able to do that if you clearly define what your values are. Sometimes there doesn't need to be a phone call because you know what is being asked is outside of that value system, or what you can deliver is within the scope of that value system, and you're empowered to do that. What's happening is you're also empowering your team members to take care of your customers instead of forcing your customer, that is, to have to wait through a series of bureaucracy to ask a bunch of questions in order to get an answer. It's always that time delay that also frustrates, our customers, and there's ways that we can empower, our team to do a much better job of that. Listen, if the organization is not clear on your values, it's because they're not clear on your beliefs. I'm going to say that again. If your organization is not clear on your values, it's because you're not clear on your beliefs. I want you to think through that. Values come from your beliefs. So one produces the next, and they're cumulative in nature. So in the same way, behavior is simply a byproduct of your values. So if you're having a behavior issue in your organization that is not acceptable to you, I encourage you to go back and begin to look at your values. Have you stated those values? Is that a shared value? Is that only your value and it's not your team members' value? See, the language of the organization, or how we express ourselves, is directly tied to the behavior that is deemed acceptable in our organization. What's acceptable? Well, it's what we value. So it kind of becomes the outer boundaries of how we operate within our organization. In many ways, the cultures of our organization are simply the sum totals of the character of our entire team. I'm dropping bombs on you today, but I want you to think about that again. In many ways, the culture of our organization are simply the sum total of the character of our entire team. So again, values, super, super important. It's your beliefs, it's your values, and then that becomes the behavior. A strong culture will either attract people or repel them depending on its values, which is exactly what you want. Because the unity cultivated by shared values creates a team that is completely aligned, fully engaged, and high performing. And I think every business owner would say that, that's my desire. I want an engaged team. I want everybody to be aligned, and I want to have a high performance team. Well, you're going to have to share the values. Listen, as we begin to wrap up today, I want you to remember every person you add to your organization either adds to it or takes away from it. So how in the world do I figure out and run through the filter of maybe even a recruiting or an interviewing process to figure out how do I get the right people on my team? I can tell you one of the things that can be so helpful for you is to clearly identify what you value, which are your values. Post those in such a way and impart them into your interviewing process, and find out the story of the people that you're wanting to add to your team. Understand how important that is. You don't want to add, a toxic person to a healthy environment. You want to make sure that you've got people that are aligned with you and are sharing those values, because they're going to add to your culture or they're going to take away. Remember, culture can only be as healthy as the leader, and your customer's experience will never be greater than your employee's experience. We'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast. Hey, Terry Gwaltney from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast today. Also want to encourage you to help us get the message out to more people. If you could like, share, and review this content on wherever you consume it. If you go into YouTube or LinkedIn or just whatever your social media channels are, and you could even share it, that would be a big help to us here at the Culture-neer podcast. Also, if you'd like some more information, you can go to www.terrygwaltney.com, where we have updates. We also have more resources. We share articles there. And you also can find our new book there called The Culture-neer. Again, we want to thank you again for taking time just to listen to the podcast or view it on YouTube. It's our goal to spend 20 or 30 minutes each time we're together to help grow your culture to a point where your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. This is Terry. We'll talk to you soon.